So when you create different objects, you could of course reference them with other objects. So when we created load data and we did the run file method, we created that child object as I mentioned earlier, but we referenced it within the object that is loading the data. So load data is referencing the object, and we just simply do that by creating a self.cd here, a child data cd. So we can create variables on the fly and reference them to objects we're creating. So effectively, variables and objects can be the same thing. And that allows us to access data as we need it in a given object. So if you look at that line 79, that basically is telling us we can now access child data as we need it with x, y, and z variable. So if we go back to the run where we're actually implementing all this, you can see that when we run the file, when we need cd, you can see we have it right there, ld.cd.addxyz. So now we can access the child data class, or the object I should say, and if we look at what's in child data, addxyz, then I can go to that method. So you can open the hierarchies to see what methods you have. If you want to see what's going on, Python, or rather Eclipse, allows you to see the hierarchies by simply opening your classes up. And you can see that addxyz simply takes add underscore data plus z, adds that z value, and then returns an a. So that's what addxyz does effectively. So that's all that really does. And then it basically just allows you to apply that method as you need it. So just remember, in child data you have to create the class similar to as you would in load data that we did earlier. You can name the module anything you want, but just keep it consistent in terms of the name of the class, a capitalization for the first letter usually, and just remember what you call it, or at least try to remember. If not, you can always look it up when you're actually creating those specific instances of classes when you apply them. So child data here, of course, being created as I need it. So when you create it, you can then access the methods as variables within an object that you've used or have created. I can also create, of course, other classes to do other kinds of functions. So in this case, I have a class that contains the data, x, y, z. Now I'm going to create something called data analysis. So data analysis is under the analysis packages, or package rather. I'm again just going to copy it into the src folder. So just to make it quick. And effectively, once again, you can see I've created data analysis as a class. So it's just simply a class like everything else. It also has a constructor, and you can see it takes child data as an input. So it's going to take some kind of input of objects that will then apply some functions to child data. It's called, in this case, do quadratic is one function. There'll be other functions, and there's a quadratic equation. So that's all that code that you see there is nothing more than the quadratic equation. There's other functions called Fibonacci, or do Fibonacci, so that's a Fibonacci sequence. So that's just another function. And there's also hypotenuse Pythagorean theorem, so that's just another function effectively added. So you can see we're going to access all these functions through one method, or really effectively one module that we have, this load data. So we're going to create an instance of data analysis, and we're giving it the child data that is required by the constructor, and then we're going to do those quadratic, Fibonacci, and hypotenuse measures over there. And you can see they're print, so that means we should get printout results, and that's what you're seeing here, is output from these methods. Okay, so that's effectively what we did today, is output different things in relation to the data that's contained in our data file. The XYZ data, but we're also outputting some of the functions that apply the XYZ in different ways. So all these print statements, all these outputs and data created are effectively referencing all those things that we loaded from the data file and did some kind of function to them.